Hello, you're watching Grace Artistry. I'm Anna Grace, and I would like to show you a technique that I used in my painting. I decided to put a whole bunch of words as if you're reading a book, and just wanted to do like that in different sections and make it look like it's following the contours of the painting. I'll show you what I mean. I added a whole bunch of words throughout my painting to just give that illustrative feel. So I had to do it in the same shape as all of the objects on my painting. So I had to use a few tricks, and I'm going to show you how I did that. It's all painted on, it's not written on with a pen, so obviously I had to use a really small brush. I just got these little liner brushes to use. They're pretty nice, they come to a nice point if you get them wet. There. That's wet, so you can see it really comes to... I also used something called transfer paper. So that's this really cheap stuff that you can buy, and it just works really well to draw on the back of it, and then it just transfers onto the surface that you're trying to paint on. Alright, let's get started. Well, I started by deciding where each page should go. I got my sister to write out a chapter from this fake book that's in the painting. So I wanted to put all of those words out on the painting. So I decided to do the things that are closest to us, the first things that you see in this chapter, and then the things farthest from us, the last things that you see. I took a bunch of pictures of the printed out pieces of paper, and I kind of like curved them and made them like bend and stuff in the same direction as all of the objects on the painting. Then I went into Photoshop and I decided what size I needed everything to be in and printed that out. So I printed pictures of the printed pages. Then I took my transfer paper, and as you can see I'm cutting it out to be the right size, and then I'm going to transfer all of those words onto the painting. Pretty simple, but was very hard on the wrist and very tiring. I found that my arm was just exhausted after a day's worth of doing this kind of stuff, or at least a few hours. It was a little bit time consuming, but I think the result was worth it in the end. Had to sharpen my pencil quite a lot. It was definitely nicer when it was really sharp, especially to get those little characteristics of the font. I usually have very, very bad printing, so this project actually improved my printing because I learned how to do, just how to do this particular font, and it was just kind of fun to sit there and listen to, I think I listened to a movie and audiobooks, and yeah, I just got stuck into it. I knew that this was going to be the easiest one because it's the biggest. I was kind of dreading those tiny, tiny, tiny little words, which I wanted to be in the city in the background. It's a fantasy story. It's about these two kids who are in the painting. And they're basically like rescuing the workers in the city. And so this chapter is not quite the climax, it's a little bit before. I wanted to kind of add some suspense and some desire to know more, desire to read more, and decided to do that moment before the climax. That's kind of my favorite part of most stories anyways, like leading up to the great moment. So I gave my little sister a few ideas, and then she went ahead and made this chapter. Her name's Emily Riva, and maybe you'll hear about her one day. She's quite creative and likes coming up with stories and stuff. I just took what she wrote and I edited it a little bit to suit my purposes a little bit more, and just went ahead and transferred it on there. I originally was going to do a bit of a different idea. I was going to make those buildings that are closest to us kind of like you're seeing double. Like if you hold your hand really close to your face, you can sort of see two hands because both of your eyes are seeing your hand, and the closer it is, the more you're seeing double. So I wanted to do that with those buildings, but as the painting got more and more complicated, I decided that idea would be better suited to a less complicated painting because it would just add chaos. As it is, it was already chaotic, so I decided not to go with that idea. And like I said earlier, I painted all of these words. I didn't write them with a pen. I just thought it would look a little bit better. Again, a lot of work, a lot of dipping the brush in my wet paint so that it wouldn't start dragging. It would just go on there really nicely. And yet if it was too wet, it would just pool and it would make all of these thick lines, which I didn't want. I just wanted the thin ones. So it's kind of a game of trying to decide how much paint I needed on my brush and how wet or dry it should be. When I wanted the words to be lighter, I would just dab it with my finger after painting it on. Or if it was too dark or whatever, I would do that as well. You really shouldn't touch acrylic paint too much, but I do, and I probably shouldn't. I just find my finger such a good tool. There, I use paper towel, that's better. I also use the back of my brush sometimes to erase. There's not an eraser on there, but it's just the wood of the brush, which can take away small amounts of paint. And I find that that's very helpful when I'm trying to be precise. So as you can probably see, I carved off the tip of the end of my brush to make a point. So that would be, it's always very useful if I want to erase just little bits of paint, or if I want to scratch into my painting, which I do sometimes, just to add another technique. Or if I'm doing like a long straight line, sometimes there'll just be a tiny little piece that's out of place, and I'll just take that back of my brush and wipe it off with it. It's a little bit cleaner and a little bit more precise than a paper towel. Now, it was a little bit tricky to paint on top of that transfer paper, the residue that it left, the graphite. I found that it was a little bit slippery when I would put it on. So even after it dried completely, if I went and rubbed it too hard, it would smudge. Or if I put water over top of it, it would smudge, even though it's acrylic paint and it should dry plasticky. Because it was on that graphite surface, it didn't really stick to the paint underneath it. So I just had to be really careful not to rub my hand against it. I was using a piece of paper to put underneath my hand when I was going to go over top of words that I had painted already. So that was a little bit different, a little bit of a learning curve. I had made a mistake earlier and had to wipe it out because it got too smudgy. And I don't mind smudges in certain spots, but I didn't want it to be in those places that should have been a bit crisper. So here I printed a few different angles because I wanted those rocks to look like they were on different angles. So I just decided like which one would look the best on the certain rocks. And I was kind of curving my paper a little bit as I was drawing these ones, because the last one that I did, I wanted it to be exactly like the picture that I had printed. But for this one, I wanted it to be a little bit more scattered, those different letters to be a little more scattered. So I just very gently moved my paper after each letter, or for some of them after each letter. And again, just going in there with that paintbrush, trying to see where I put all of those words. And generally, I start with the thing that's least important so that I can learn it as I go. So on that last little section, I started on the bottom and then worked my way up, because the words on the top were the ones that you would see easiest. So here the letters are getting a little bit smaller. I put the transfer paper on backwards that first time. That's why I had to go over and redo it. Sometimes when I'm listening to movies or whatever, I get a little distracted, so don't quite pay attention. And then here I wanted the curve of those words to be a little bit more prominent than what the picture that I had printed was, so I just copied it right off the page without transferring it on. And I started using a bit more of a bluish tint to the words instead of just the black, because it's a little bit further away and I wanted to show that distance. Still fairly dark though. And here I had to start thinking about where those words should be a little bit more. I don't know what this is. It's like a smokestack kind of thing. I think there's like steam coming out of it. I had this idea where there's energy in this fake planet, and so the city that is in the background is kind of harvesting all of that energy, and they're using mutated animals to do it somehow. So part of the story is that these two characters are going to be saving the animals. I had got new glasses like a few days, or maybe like one day before I did this project, and I'm really happy that I did, because my old ones were so spotty and so scratched, and I definitely needed to be able to see well to do this kind of thing. And as happens in a lot of projects, I got a little bit tired of just doing the same thing over and over again. So I decided to go in and do some painting. I wanted to make this ship pop out a little bit more, be a little bit more contrasted with the background. So started adding some really dark colors in there. That dog on the bottom was kind of a funny story. I put in a crocodile in the hanging from the ship above this part of the painting, and one of the kids that I took photos of for reference, he loves crocodiles, so I put that crocodile in, and then I felt kind of bad because the girl didn't have an animal of her own. So I asked her, I was like, okay, well, what's your favorite animal? What would you like in the painting? And so she said, I'd like a terrier. So it wasn't exactly like scary or ominous like I kind of wanted this feel of this painting to be. So I thought, okay, I can do that. I can add a terrier in there. So that's what's hanging down from that small ship. I think it kind of works, kind of cute. So already the ship is looking a little bit crisper, a little bit more 3D, and my video quality is not great, but you can probably imagine there are a lot more details in here than what we can see, and a little bit more vibrant color as well. Obviously these animals are huge. I drew some little tiny figures on that ship, and you can see they're like, one of them would be the size of that dog's ear. Just kind of fun to do something a little bit more imagination based and not necessarily based in reality, or not something you could take a photograph of, but still looks a little bit real. And you can see how that liner brush is coming in handy even in regular painting. There we go, there's the detail. This whole painting is done on a wood panel, a Baltic birch wood panel. I think it's about 1/4 inch. And I do like painting on wood because you can paint nice and smoothly, and it doesn't go into those little crevices like it does on a canvas. And in the long run, it'll last quite long because a canvas will bend and contract, and the paint will become stiff, but with a board it'll all just stay together nice and solidly. So here I'm going to do a shadow on this smokestack, and it was kind of funny because I had seen my own shadow because I had a light behind me, and I really liked the way that it looked on the painting, so I decided to just add it in the actual painting. And I had to do a varnish on top of the letters, or else they would run a little bit. So I did that really quickly and tried not to brush over it very much, and then let that dry completely, and then I could do this shadow. So I actually did mix the color just looking at what my real shadow looked like on the painting. So a little bit of blue, a little bit of magenta. I just use the primary colors in my paintings. I think it's easier. And then I took a big, that's a diamond brush, and it's really like quite soft. So I use that to blend. And my mom called me, and it was the most inconvenient time ever for her to call me because this was a really tricky thing to do. Yeah, so I forgot. I actually forgot to do that varnish first, so it did blur it out quite a bit. So I just had to go over it and learn my lesson. And yes, that's my ADD. I'm getting distracted there. Alright, it's time for those tiny, tiny, tiny words. This time I did not paint over top, I just used the transfer paper, and I thought it looked pretty good on there, so I transferred it on and then did that varnish on top of it, and I just left it like that because there was no way I was going to get my paintbrush in there. Shave that pencil down real small. And I looked at this afterwards, and you can read it. You can see what it says if you look really hard. And again, just shifting that paper over because this structure that I'm putting it on is curved. I want to really show that. So just millimeter by millimeter, move it over. And transfer paper is also nice because you can just use that eraser to get rid of it. Just watching this again, I'm remembering how much my fingers and arm hurt afterwards. So you can see that crocodile down there. I had to research crocodiles for a while. I actually got addicted to watching The Crocodile Hunter. It was so interesting. And I was like, I'll watch like, 2 of these videos, and about 50 videos later, I'm like, I think I'm running out of videos. He was like the first YouTuber. It's great. And he's just so fun and funny. So I was, to make my pencil even pointier, I would just kind of go on the side of it and put it down on the paper, and do that all over the sides of the pencil, so that it would be a little bit more pointy. Because at a certain point, you can't shave it down anymore. It's just gonna be what it is. And here I was really thinking about which words would go best at this part of the painting, because it's, in theory, you would kind of stop here. If you're gonna read through that whole chapter in my painting, you'd start at the closest point and then finish at the farthest point. But I did also want to make it look like it was going into the book, so I do add some larger letters later. So I thought that one wasn't quite curved enough. It looked a little bit stiff. I wanted to remember to keep it with the contours of all of that magical smoke or whatever it is coming out of the book. So there's the varnish that I'm putting on. It's just called Gloss Medium and Varnish, and it's Liquitex brand. It worked really well for this project, and once I put one layer on, then it stayed perfectly. Alright, so here I went into Photoshop, and I wanted to add a border around the painting, so I just tried some different things, and I picked the one that I liked. I use Photoshop for this kind of thing, or for designing a painting, just to see how it would look without actually committing to it and actually putting down paint. I want to just see a really quick result. So I decided on that one that went over the girl and behind the boy, because I thought that would help to make her look a little bit farther back. And then also the buildings in the front, I wanted to see enough of the border that it made sense, and not just like a tiny little bit, and you're like, what is that white line doing there? So I was a little bit worried, because I was gonna show this painting to the family of these kids, and I was like, are they gonna, care that there's a line going through their daughter? But they seem to love the painting, so that was cool. So that's just a white pastel, I think it's a white chalk pastel pencil that I was using to mark where I wanted to go with this. And I used a ruler, of course, and painter's tape, which is my best friend when you're talking about making a border. So I did find that my lines were a little bit too close to the edge, so I decided to move them in a little bit. So just using white paint, I actually did a varnish coat before I did the paint, so that none of it would seep underneath and go under the tape. But it is good tape. It's frog tape, which is much better than just no-name brand painter's tape. And because of my impatience, I must use a blow dryer. I've got my old glasses on again because I was working with varnish, and I didn't want to get any little spots on my glasses. I know that happened for those ones, and I want to be extra careful. So I think I did 3 layers of white, and then that was super solid. I find that borders just make things look a little bit more professional. I really like adding them. And I did all of those little dots too in the painting, which added atmosphere, or maybe they're like little fairies or fireflies, something like that. Just added a little bit of magic. I'm listening to an audiobook called Wives and Daughters by Elizabeth Gaskell. And first I had watched the movie, and I'm finding that the movie really accurately represented what's in the book. I'm just enjoying that. It's a good one. And that's so satisfying to take that tape off. There we go. Oh, not done yet. I love this part where you just try to think of finishing touches to just make it that much better. Well, there you go. That was the result right there. You can see those beautiful words, and I think it turned out really well. I'm liking it, and I might add more words in paintings in the future. I'll have to watch out for that. I hope you enjoyed this video. Please press like and leave a comment, and I will see you next month. Thank you for watching.